Melfi and her development?
Well, she was compromised from the very beginning. The seeds of her own corruption were in almost the first thing she said. But there was no long-range plans for her. I mean, all to begin with, as I was saying before, most pilots that are written don't get made into pilots, don't get shot. The ones that are shot don't get bought for series, and the ones that are series don't stay on for long. So I never bothered thinking about long-term anything on that show. I just thought about I thought we would be off the air. To begin with, we had so much fun doing it that first season that we thought there's no way this will continue. We were left completely alone out there in Queens. No one ever said boo to us or don't do this, or only one instance of that, but don't do this or don't do that. A great crew and a great pool of actors coming in to do, to read and audition. And new territory for television. Gangster, a mobster who's a hero, not a hero, a protagonist. And so we really enjoyed it. And we all had a lot of mutual respect, I think. And we felt we were doing something that we liked. And because all of us, I'm talking about Jim, I think Edie, I remember having these conversations, because we liked it so much, we figured this will not happen. This will be 1 year and out. And unlike a lot of television shows, it was in the can before anybody even saw it. The whole show was in the can before. In other words, usually in a network show, a new show, you have 4 or 5 of them in the can before September rolls around and it goes on the air. And then a lot of people, then you're either canceled or you're getting a lot of notes and all that stuff. We never had that. The whole show was done before the public ever saw it. All 13 episodes. So therefore, I didn't really think about long term for Melfi.
What about in the short term? I mean, did you expect her to change or have?
No, she was going to be a therapist. Period. No, I thought she would be a therapist. My concern was, I thought, how long can we keep this going on? How long can we have these scenes before they become tiresome or repetitive? And there were times we didn't, really lean on the therapy thing too much. And especially after 3 or 4 seasons, when that therapy really wasn't going very well or going very far, sometimes it wouldn't feel too organic, then we just wouldn't do it.
Did you expect that at some point that she would end up firing Tony as a patient?
No, never thought that. I had no long-term goals for her at all, but didn't really think that. I guess it was the first season where we met her ex-husband and her son, and didn't see that coming. Didn't realize she would have her own therapist, although maybe in the back of my mind I knew that a lot of therapists do. So this Kupferberg guy, initially there was no plans for him or any family for her. She was just going to be a therapist.
So you really didn't have a backstory for the characters, or just
specifically
for her?
No.
Did you have it for other characters?
No, not really.
How were you able to keep the backstory, once the backstory was created in service to a story, how were you able to keep everything straight?
I don't know, I can remember those things. I mean, we have more than one person on the staff, and so we all sort of, it becomes like a alternate universe, and everybody knows it, and everybody has a pretty good idea about it too. It's not so much a problem of keeping it straight what happened in the past. It's like you're building that past as you go, and so you have to make sure that something you're saying happened in the past, you're going to be stuck with that. So if you say that Tony's father went to jail, or I mean that's an easy one. If you say that Tony's father spent time in a mental institution in 1963, that has big implications. You're going to have to be stuck with that. So you got to make sure that you don't that when you do these things for short-term gain, that it's worth it.
Were there ever any gaffes where that it said one thing in one episode and one thing in another, and it was
I don't
pointed out
think
that
so.
way?
I think online people have picked out what they consider to be gaffes, and as I recall reading them, like, they were wrong. They were not gaffes. People are very literal minded, so a lot of people are. So even when someone says something sarcastically, or it was clear that what Tony was saying was not the truth, at least that's what he said. I don't think we had a lot of gaffes. And then the writer's assistants become sort of the repositories of the history. So they will often say, or you can say to them, go back in the scripts and look, what was his father's name, or what year did he go to out west, all that kind of stuff.
You mentioned earlier on about how everything a lot of the characters said were lies.
Everything.
So how in terms of someone going back to a script or whatever, how would they know whether that was the truth or not within the actual backstory, or did it not matter?
Well, it could matter or not. It just depend. It just would depend. I mean, they didn't lie necessarily. In other words, they didn't always state facts which would be contravened by history. They didn't make up. Well, they did sometimes. What they did was spin things in such a way that it was not accurate. But I mean, Paulie Walnuts would never have said to you. He would never have said to you something about his father that. Well, if he needed to. It's hard to explain.
Let's. We were talking about Dr. Melfi. Talk about Lorraine Bracco. How was she cast, and what did she bring to that role?
She again, she came through casting, but she did not audition because she'd been nominated for Academy Award and was very well known and wouldn't have agreed to audition, I don't think. And she was brought around originally for Carmela. And as Lorraine tells the story, she said to me, I don't want to do that role again. I did that in Goodfellas. In fact, we had a conversation, and I said to her, I don't want you to do that role again. I don't want you to play Tony's wife. But we do have this role of the therapist, which maybe you'd be interested in. We were probably both thinking the same way at the same time.
And what did she bring to the role?
I think a great deal of humanity. Lorraine's very funny. Lorraine has this whole Lucille Ball sort of side. And sometimes you saw little bits of that. She was also, she wasn't intimidated by him or thrown by him initially.
You say initially?
Well, there was a point in time where she was drinking because he was, she had to run, at the end of the first season, did she have to run away or something because they were going to kill her? So this stuff started to get to her, and also he was, he would do this thing where he was sexually attracted to her, and he, put these moves on her, and she was drinking for a while, I would recall that. But I don't think, Lorraine as a person brought to that role a sense of strength that made her more than capable of standing up to Tony Soprano.
Let's talk about Carmela Soprano and the development of that character.
She's the wife. What else is there to say?
Did you base her on anyone you knew?
No. I mean, she had certain things in common, I suppose, with my wife, although I can't think of what they were at this point. I don't remember a lot of this now, but my wife is not like her at all. But probably Carmela's good points were kind of like my wife. Intelligence, good counsel, as much as Tony ever availed himself of it. She was in his corner, certainly. Carmela was a problematic character, and we ran into trouble with Carmela. I felt after a while.
In what ways?
She wasn't realistic. She was not. I mean, a real mob wife would not have been pissing and moaning about the fact that probably would not have been pissing and moaning about the fact that he had outside women, or not as much as she did. But even more so, she would not have been going through all that angst about, well, my husband makes his money from bloodshed. She was a kind of, unfortunately, I don't know how we got into that, a little bit of a remnant of typical TV morality, a little bit of a shard of network bullshit.
Did you try to get out of that when you saw it? Would you always try to pull it the other way?
Well, it became. I mean, she was religious, okay, and so and why was she religious? Why did she have that priest? I guess she had that priest because I think she had that priest because I was interested in making fun of some stupid thing they had on CBS about a mafia, Bella Mafia or something. There was a priest, was the woman with her priest, and so I wanted to make fun of that. She had the priest for that reason. Also, it was kind of like a Renaissance or medieval thing that, a duchess or a baroness would have their own father confessor, that kind of thing. So she had that priest. But since she had the priest, then the priest would in some way be calling her attention to the fact that she and her family were involved in an immoral operation. So I guess it was legitimate from that standpoint. But the shrine, it just became too much of the shrine. It's like, well, then leave. If you don't like it, you don't like it there. If he's such an asshole, go. But she was always complaining, which is fun. Not that Edie Falco Edie Falco did exactly what she was supposed to do. She never complained and said, I get sick and tired of doing this. It wasn't anything like that. She just was too good of an actress to be used that way. She's got too much going on. And unfortunately, our feeling about the reality of that woman, maybe this wasn't exactly correct, she also would not have the opportunity to create a life within it or outside of it. In other words, for her, Tony would not be crazy for her to open a maternity shop somewhere on the Main Street. He wouldn't want her selling real estate. Stay home. He wouldn't want that. He wouldn't allow that. So she was boxed in, as her daughter said very often to her. But anyway, so this constant whinging about their life of crime, I felt became a waste of her talent, which is why we had the divorce happen, or the separation. Never did get divorced.
Talk a little about Edie Falco herself and casting her, and what she could do within that role to make it work.
I don't know what you mean. What could she do within that role?
Yeah, you were saying that she was kind of boxed and never complained about it, but how did she bring that character to life?
Edie Falco is an extremely gifted human being. She's like one of the best actresses I've ever worked with. She was the last person that we cast. Everything was ready to go, and then I always thought that Livia was the last person that we cast, but then Eileen Landers reminded me that was not the case. Carmela came last, and she had already been she was in an HBO series at the time. She was in Oz. Just came in and boom, that was it. Just did it right.
And talk about in the world that you created, the role of women in general there.
What about it?
Just in how they were treated generationally. Did you find it a realistic portrait of women in general?
Did I find The Sopranos a realistic portrait of women in general?
Mm-hmm. For the world that you created.
Yeah, I did. As I say, I think we did. As I'm looking back on it now, we might have been able to let Carmela get away with a little more than we let her get away. She might have had a little bit more Tony might have had not so quite a tight a leash. Although it went ran a long time from when we started in 1997. I don't know. No, I think it was probably fairly realistic. Although I could see that some mob women would be allowed some sort of entrepreneurial exploits. But that's now. I don't know if even 10, 12 years ago, I'm not sure that that's the case. I'm just not sure. No one really knows about these things. But we also had a technical consultant who was telling us, if Carmela made too much of a fuss, if it got serious, push come to shove, he could have killed her. So I don't think there have been many mob guys, if any, who killed their wives. And yet this happens a lot, that husbands kill their wives, so why would those guys be exempt? They think they might be the last to be exempt from that. But in the last resort, if you really go up against Tony Soprano, he's not going to go easily. He'll do anything.
Was there any character on the show that was not in jeopardy from him?
His children were never in jeopardy from him. And she was not in jeopardy from him. I mean, theoretically, this is what our technical consultant, and this is just his opinion. At the angriest he ever got at her, he went at her and he hit her, but he made sure that he missed and put a hole in the wall. I think he respected her a great deal. Also, he had a very tough mother. He's not somebody who would take on an intelligent woman without thinking. I'm sure he was a little bit frightened of Carmela to a certain extent. He probably thought she was more intelligent than him, which I think she was. Maybe that's where she was sort of like my wife. I think she was more intelligent than him.
Livia Soprano. You talked a little bit about that you said that her character is based on your mother.
Yeah, she is. Yeah, her character is based on my mother, and a lot of her dialogue was stuff that just came out of my mother's mouth. I didn't have to make it up. My mother was not, my mother didn't try to kill me. She didn't plot my demise. But I'll bet she wanted to. She was nuts. She was a narcissistic, infantile woman consumed by fear and self-regard. My mother, and that character too. Now my mother also, she took very good care of me. She was worried about me. She never brutalized me or did anything like that. But I guess not much compassion or empathy, not there. Empathy was not my mother's long suit. She could understand her own suffering, but no one else's.
You mentioned that a lot of the lines that she actually said made it out of Livia's mouth. What were some of the ones that...
It's hard to remember, but she said, when Livia said about someone called late at night, the phone rang late last night, and Tony said, who was on the phone? She said, I didn't answer it. It was after dark. And Tony said, I don't understand. Why don't you, the phone is an auditory thing. What difference does it make whether it's light or dark, whether you answer the phone? That was my mother's thing, that somehow you don't answer the phone at night. It doesn't really make any sense. Answer the door, I can understand, but the phone? My mother would say, poor you, that kind of thing. That became Livia's trademark. Oh, poor you. I wish the Lord would take me. That was my mother's thing, too. I wish the Lord would take me now. Stab me here, stab me right now. That would hurt less than what you just said. all that.
And Nancy Marchand, who played Livia, how was she cast for that?
Came in to read, was through casting. Oh, that was a very, very difficult. We must have looked at, I don't know, 300 actresses came in of that age and younger, and boy, they just nobody came close. There was no. It was we were. I thought this is not going to work at all. They just were out there, really good actresses, just not delivering that character in the least. Way too hysterical, everything off, everything wrong. And then in comes Nancy Marchand, who is, has made her career playing WASP matriarchs and Shrinking Violets. Boom, just got it.
On the first.
Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely. She just understood it. I don't know how does that, that's the talent. Just she had an instinct for that person's human nature.
Did she at all remind you of your mother?
Oh, very much so. Very much so. Oh yeah, yeah. In fact, my cousins all said, "Oh my God, she's not like your mother at all, and yet she's just like your mother." Yeah. And the other thing about it was, here I'm saying my mother was such a whack job and a crazy person and a lunatic and this and all this stuff. I don't know how many people I met, thousands of people I met say, God, that character is just like my mother, or it's just like my grandmother, or it's just like my aunt. So, I guess my mother wasn't that out there. She was in a way, the most popular character on the show, the first season, I think. Because she would say anything to anybody. You never knew what was going to come out of her mouth, and there was no governor on the motor.
And you felt that way about your
Yeah, that's my mother. My mother had no conception of what not to say, inappropriate.
And you said that she had a stay of execution basically for the first season, that she was supposed to die.
Well, it was difficult because she was when he got to the to the old people's home. Mm-hmm. She was going to be dead. Therefore, he was cheated of his final. He was going to tell her off finally, and I think he was going to smother her with a pillow. And then he got there, and she had a stroke. In the movie version, in my head, she was going to be dead, therefore cheating him of closure. But she was so good that we didn't want to do that. Plus, she was very ill, and she said to me that just keep me working. So we did. But the problem was that because she had tried to kill her son in that first season, there was no way that he was going to forgive her, that they were going to be having scenes together in the next season. So all that whole big, support tower of the show, which was very, very important. It was the show, the first season, that was gone. Because, as an intelligent, realistic person, he would never forgive her for that. So those scenes weren't going to happen anyway, and they didn't. So she was kind of reduced to like talking on the phone and complaining to people about this or that, or playing a spoiler role. But she was not. We got her involved with her daughter. That's how we solved that one with Janice.
Is that what she was brought in to keep?
Janice, Janice, yes, yeah. And they were great. They were great together. And those stories between Janice and Livia are, I think, some of the best things we did.
Was Janice thought of in the beginning, or
No.
was she actually made up in order to?
She was made up, yeah. Once Livia was gone, we needed another crazy woman, I guess. We didn't think of it that way. What did we think? We needed another antagonist, another domestic antagonist for Tony, for him to be able to slug it out with. And the sister seemed kind of an obvious way to go. Plus, it would be a way to keep Livia in the show, because because you couldn't play scenes between Tony and Livia anymore, you could start to play scenes with Janice and Livia. And it was keeping Livia alive dramatically, comedically, that was important.
What about Tony's family life, the two kids? How important was that to the...
Extremely important. I have said before that, I had a child in, 1980. If I had not ever had a child, there would never have been a Sopranos, because it was, in a way, it's kind of about that, if you think about it. It's about his childhood, and then it's about his wife and him as parents of children, once the decision was made to do a domestic drama about the mafia, the kids had to be important. And we got a lot of praise, People appreciated the way those kids were depicted, because they were not the typical empowered children that you have in TV and movies now, you know, where they have the right, they know exactly what to say at all times. And they, you know, they know about feta cheese and all that. So you know, they were just kids. But people liked it because, strangely enough, Tony's children hobbled him. This powerful mob guy couldn't make these brats A, do what he wanted, B, be happy, C, leave him alone. And that people, and you know, so I think they appeared to people as very contemporary American teenagers, real American teenagers, not the kind that, you know, not the, you know, what's it called, that channel, CW or whatever. Yeah, not that.
And what about his work, the people that he worked with, his guys? What can you talk a little about casting them, about creating that world, the mob world?
Well, they all just came through, you know, through Georgianne, and except for Stevie. Stevie Van Zandt was somebody that I had seen on these Bruce Springsteen album covers and on his own album covers, his Disciples of Soul. And I would always have been interested in his face. And then my wife and I were watching, another story I've told a million times, my wife and I were watching the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame when they inducted the Rascals, New Jersey Italian rock and roll band. And Stephen did the induction ceremony. He dressed like the Rascals. He had one of those poofy shirts on and a little tie. And he was just great. He was great, and I just thought, we got to get this guy in there somewhere. The rest of them came through casting. He wasn't easy to find. He was not easy to find, though, Steve.
What about Paulie?
Paulie, you know, if you look at the pilot, Paulie had 2 lines of dialogue. He said, T, I think, Dick Baron's here to see you, and something else. And clearly he commanded a lot more attention than that. He just blossomed. Tony did. He really did.
Uncle Junior?
Oh, my favorite. Junior is again. To me, that's the reality to me of. There's separate. Everybody has their own reality, and there's separate realities. But to me, Livia and Junior, in a way, are realistic senior citizens. I think the ones on TV, they're sort of like crotchety, but they're basically good people. These two were big babies, like many old people get to be. All they thought about was themselves. It was second childhood. And Junior is like Livia, completely selfish man. He was another guy who would say anything. And he was every writer's favorite character to write. Because what he said was so off the wall, and his self-pity, oh my God.
Big Pussy.
There's this, you know, people love Big Pussy. To me, he was a mob guy, soldier. Vinny's very good. Vinny did a great job, but I never, you know, Pussy was not that interesting a character to me. He was beloved, I know, but.
Christopher?
Christopher. Well, he was so we couldn't hire too many people from Goodfellas. We had Lorraine, and then we had Michael, and I think Tony had been in Goodfellas. I think a lot of those guys had been, and Tony Darrow also, but I was concerned because Christopher was so identified with Goodfellas because he was playing Spider, but he just took that role and really went with it. And another one of my favorite characters, I gotta say, Christopher. His level of self-pity was so profound, so deep. You could not get that guy to not feel bad about all the things that have been done to him, no matter what. It's where he lived.
The names of your characters are so creative and so interesting. How did you come up with the names?
How so? Forgot to turn this off again. Yes, the names?
Yeah, the names, the names, the nicknames. How did you come? Where did this come from? Just
The name.
of the characters.
Well, I don't know. Just I guess from living in New Jersey. Frankly, seriously. I mean, I just knew people who had those names. Junior's real name was Corrado, and my mother had a friend named Corrado. He's called Uncle Junior because I had an Uncle Junior. And when the show first came on the air, people realized how ridiculously funny that is. People got used to it, but if you think about it, Uncle Junior is like really an idiot name. My Uncle Junior was actually my cousin Joe, but he's a lot older than me. So he's my cousin, but I had cousins who were contemporaries of mine, who actually were his nephews and nieces. So they called him his name was Joe Jr. They called him Uncle Junior, so I called him Uncle Junior. But I could see that there's a preposterousness about that name, so that's where that name came from. The rest of them just to me just seem really not particularly creative. I don't know. I'm not sure what you're driving at.
Okay. So once the show, once the show went through its first season, when did you know that you were picked up?
Oh, not for a while. Every year we went through this ritual dance where they would pretend like there was no big show they had to pick up. They would pretend like their very livelihood was not dependent on picking up The Sopranos. Every year we have to wait, and then finally, you want to do another season? It's going to cost a lot of money. But every year, but it was always way too long. They should have told us earlier on, but they never did. And maybe it was a mutual game. I wasn't sure I wanted to commit to another year, so they probably thought, well, who knows what he's going to ask for. So it was all that stuff.
Would you think about it though before? Would you already start plotting it out before you had the deal?
No.
I'll talk about actually, first plotting out the season arc, and then how you would work with your writers to achieve it.
Well, I told you about the first season. The season arc was very simple. It was that movie that then the second season became more complicated. And I would plot it out. I'd put down 1 through 13 episodes, and I'd sort of make up. This happens in episode 1, and that happens in episode 2. This happens in 4. This happens in 5, 7, all the way along. And then that's how the second season was done. And maybe the second season had a separate. That was since Tony was the protagonist, that was basically the Tony story. Maybe the second season had maybe it was Pussy, because Pussy was going through that Stockholm syndrome thing. He had been flipped. Maybe we did a separate thing for his story too, and began to see how they related to each other. Then, as time went on, it got more complicated. So every character had one of those. They were listed vertically, and then the episodes that way, and you saw how this plot development affected that development, affected this development, theoretically. And I would do that by myself. And my wife was also a great help to me, Denise, at that time, doing that. At that point, every year, I would tell her stuff I had, and she would respond to it, and come up with things too. So I would bring that into the writer's room, and I'd have a whole big chart with everybody's thing in it, and I'd lay it all out for them. And then I would say, okay, so what are we really going to do? Because I wasn't really interested in not that I wasn't interested in those things I'd come up with, but what I really wanted to do every episode was make a little movie every episode, almost a standalone movie. So we never did episodes that were just served a bunch of plot. In other words, just moved the main plot forward. Every episode had a beginning, middle, and an end. So that theoretically, any episode could stand on its own and be a little movie. So the ones that you can, like College, that's obvious. Pine Barrens, that's obvious. All the ones where they went out of town for some reason were obvious. But that was so. In order to make those little movies, it was more than just like let's just service this huge main plot, and we throw a lot of that stuff out. And sometimes there'd only be like 1 or 2 plot points from that original outline in any given episode. I don't mean all the way through, but like episode 5 of the season might have nothing to do with anything that had come before or after. But there'd be a few mentions of it just to keep things alive. And that's how we did it.
Okay, and how were the stories divvied up among the writers?
We would, so we would figure out, I'd say, okay, what are we really going to do this about? And it would be some kind of a variation of the Steve Cannell and Juanita Bartlett, myself thing, where we the staff, would sit around saying, well, what are we really going to do this about? And, just beat your head against the wall, and you're trapped in that writer's room for, whatever it is, 12 hours a day, and then start to talk about other things. And out of people's reminiscences or small talk, you might get a glimmer of something, and say, well, why don't we do that? And actually, I did the story work. I actually decided what the stories would be, and then actually plotted them out. And then the other writers were in the room, and sometimes there was input from them, but I found by and large it was my job. And it seems that that's often the case. And I think that's often the case because they try to, writers will try to put their input in, and usually they're told, no, I don't like that, by who's ever running it. No, I don't like that. I don't see that. I don't want to do that. So then they stop after a while. So then go ahead, do all your wonderful ideas if you don't like any of these. So that's kind of the way it would work out. And then we put it all together, and there would be input from them. I don't mean to say there was none, but basically I did the story plotting. I had come a long way from when I started, which I didn't understand that stories had to be plotted, to doing that work. And we would first, so we would do 3, within each episode we might have 4 stories, an A story, B story, C story, D story. And we would plot them out one at a time. Do this whole story. I can never think of examples. Carmela and the English teacher. Do that whole story, plot it out beginning, middle, and end for any given episode, even though it might be in more than one episode. Then the B story. Steve Buscemi. Tony Blundetto goes to work at the Korean laundry. Okay, plot that story out, beginning, middle, and end. Then whatever the other 2 stories were. Then we would cut those strips up and then and put them all together so that we would make an episode. And they didn't necessarily have anything to do with each other, these stories. But strangely enough, they would have some kind of thematic unity to them. It would always take that on. So that even a story about Tony Blundetto in the laundry and Carmela with the English teacher and Madame Bovary, somehow there would be these echoes going back and forth.
Were they conscious, or did they just sort of come out of the...
I think they I don't know. They were not conscious. The more conscious they were, the worse it was. The more manipulative and contrived it seemed. It was better when they seemingly had nothing to do with each other, and yet there'd always be some little, which then you could sort of dial up a little bit. I don't know how that worked.
Now, the writer's room, how many writers did you have working with you at any given time?
It changed. It would be me, Terry, Matt. 4 or 5. Although when I say 5, it was often like a couple of them. That's really one writer. So 4. It'd be me and 3 others.
And what do you look for in a writer when you're hiring a writer on?
That's a really good question. I guess people who see things as, it's one of two things. Either they see it my way, and if so, I think, oh, that's really original. Or they, in fact, are seeing things in an original way, and I appreciate what they're. I mean, that sounds sort of conceited, but I guess, like, how do you pick your friends? People who think the way you do, or people who you get along with. You make each other laugh. Well, it's the same thing. And what I usually like is people whose characters I believe. I believe that the characters that they write are quirky. You don't know what's going to happen next. That's what I really look for. When you read their scripts, you go, oh, I never thought he'd say that, or didn't think it was going this way. I don't mean I didn't think it was going this, like, wow, they threw us a curve by this indirection. I just mean that the characters are unpredictable. They're human. That's what I look for.
And in terms of the writing room itself, and were you leading it, or did you
Yes.
feel more? You did.
Yes.
What was your approach?
Well, it's kind of like I said. I mean, I'd say, what are we going to do? You know, and how about this? How about that? And conversations would start, and sometimes people would volunteer an idea, and I'd usually say no, or think about it and say no, or
Would there be arguments that would ensue from that?
arguments.
Yeah.
Arguments were, there was a lot of arguing, and then a strange thing started to develop where they would start talking amongst themselves, either telling stories about some madcap adventure in high school, or their marriage, or talking about mob life or something, and they would just and I would be waiting and waiting and waiting for us to, like, get to what we really had to be doing, and it would just evolve into all this blah 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 blah, and I would actually physically move myself from the table to a couch in the corner, and I'd let them go on talking, so I could actually sort of, like, just try to see the layout of the story in my head, or try to put the story together in my head based on something that we might have been talking about. And then invariably we'd get to a point where I'd say, all right, how about this? And I'd go to the board and start to, like, just write it out. Like, 1, Tony falls in the pool. 2, pool man is late. 3, like, trying to do it in a way off the top, without a lot of logic mediating anything. So that it just came, so that, well, it's either it's off the top or it's off the bottom. Either it's in the subconscious, I don't know. Just not think it through. Just like, sort of more like music. Like, big drum beat here, cymbal there. You know, more like rhythm or something. Or colors. And then worry about the logic later a little bit more. That's the way I sort of remember it.
But you were in control the whole time
Hmm?
You were in control the whole time of how that
Yes.
room worked.
Yes.
Was it considered a sacred place where you wouldn't divulge what people were talking about in their private lives, things like that, outside of that room?
Yeah, I would say so. Mm-hmm.
Did you ever have outsiders in on those?
No. In fact, we had an assistant, a young woman who worked with us, and in the 3rd or 4th season, we thought about bringing her in so that she could take notes of everything we were saying. And then we decided not to, because she wasn't a writer, there would be no way she could have understood. Because I'll tell you very frankly, a lot of racist, misogynist, horrible talk went on in that room.
And how does that contribute to the
And we
creative-
didn't think that she would understand that.
And how does that contribute to the creative process? It's just that anything can go on the table? Is that?
Yeah, yeah.
Talk about some of the directors that you work with on the show.
We sort of narrowed it down over time to regulars that we had. They were all really good, and I think they all actually grew on the show too. They all really got to love it. You know, the ones that worked out really got to love the show. John Patterson, Alan Coulter, Tim Van Patten, great director, great guy, and I just saw him, I think, develop a lot. And John, who I'd been, John Patterson had been my, when I first went to film school, he was the TA. He was like, I was a student and he was a TA. And then we went back, we both went to Hollywood around the same time. We never worked together. He went into the director's program and I was trying to be a writer. And we never really worked professionally together until the end of, well, actually it turned out to be the end of his life, but 20 or 25 years after we started, we were working together. And I saw him, he had become a really very well respected director of Movies of the Week by that time. So here's another guy who was, went to film school because he was interested in cameras. Like I said before, it was the technology of it that interested John Patterson. He loved photography, and he loved camera and sound and stuff like that. That's what he was into. So for a long time during our relationship, either just as friends or as in talking about film, it seemed to me he had no clue about story. And he would like these movies. I'd say, what the? God. And his reasoning was, I never could get it. But then after working in the business, he developed, he learned about that. And he became really good with story. And that's why he was such a great director. He knew where the values were. He may have not been able to make up those stories, and he may have not been able to write those stories, but he knew what was happening between those people, whereas I would not say that was the case when he was in his late 20s, that he understood characters and people that well. Understood people, but he was focused on something else. And when he saw a movie, he was not focused on the human dynamics that much, but he got there. And so in The Sopranos, he really flourished.
Do you think that those directors really brought your vision the way you use?
Yeah, as much as they could, yeah.
Talk about like a typical week in your life at that point on The Sopranos.
Well, we worked 5 days a week. Sometimes I'd write on the weekends, but not that much, strangely enough. I'd always, I was used to episodic television where you're just writing all the time, Saturday, Sunday, Monday. But didn't do it I just refused to do it on this show. I didn't write as much, but I did a lot of the editing. So it's hard for me to say what my typical week was. It's too complicated.
Okay, well, I was going to get into that with the editing. You mentioned earlier that was a real love of yours.
Yeah, it is.
Can
That
you
began
talk
to
about
take a lot.
process for you?
Well, that began to take a lot of my time, because you can remake the entire show in the editing, and you really don't know what the show is about until you've cut it a few times, and it's just the best thing in the world. It's just, if you're writing, it can be anything, right? It's a blank sheet of paper, so it can go anywhere. If you're editing, even as a writer, you only have the pieces of stuff that you've already written to work with, but you can change it. You can erase and rewrite it. With film, your choices are limited. You've got that film, and you've got to make that film work. And that is, that's where filmmaking really pays off in terms of creative satisfaction.
What was your process, though, in the edit room? What was your process for determining that cut?
Just the editor would do an assembly, and then it's this is all prescribed by the Guild. Then the directors had a certain amount of time to do their cut, and they'd be all pissy about it because they'd say, "Well, I don't want to bother. He's just going to tear it apart." But they would have 2 or 3 days, and I would have like 7 or 8 months. So I would just, cut it, recut it, try this, try that, let's try this, let's try that, let's go back to here, let's go back to that again, let's try it with this song, let's move this scene over here, let's start it over there, let's make the end of the movie the beginning of the movie. That's what it's all about. It's what they say, it's a plastic medium. And, and I remember I went to this Directors Guild thing, and Arthur Penn was there. And he said that at some point in his, I'm not going to say it the right way, I had him clear it up for me too, and he said, at some point in my life, at a point in my life, I was in a position where I took two pieces of film and put them together. And that spoke to me. And that sent some sort of a current right into me. And that's why I became a filmmaker. In other words, it's like, take this, which doesn't seem anything to do with that, put these two things together and see what happens when you put this together with that. What happens in this dynamic, filmic way? It's so great. I can't say enough about it. It's magic. I mean, it's obviously people say it's magic. I can't say enough about what a treat it is. What a... Also, the great feeling that you get, this great sort of expiratory feeling when the show's not working, all of a sudden you say, you know, this whole thing that we've worked so hard on, out. Yeah, but it cost me, out. This is not in the picture. And all of a sudden, so you have three things: this shot, and that shot. And this middle one is the one you love the most. It's the reason you did the whole show. And then you realize, you know what? This is going. Take that out. Take this one and put it together with that one, and all of a sudden this new explosion happens. This new meaning. It's the best.
How do you know it's done?
You know, it's just, I don't know. You know, Fellini said it's never done. Fellini said a film is never done, it's just abandoned.
Was there ever any censorship to anything?
Well, yeah, there's, you know, no frontal nudity. There's also in actresses' contracts, there's not a lot of that. That's about it.
What about the violent content? Did you feel what approach did you have in terms of what you would show, what you wouldn't show?
It was never really programmatic that way. We just sort of took each violent act, you know, separately as its own thing. Sometimes it's a question of cost, you know. I mean, to do it right sometimes is more expensive than to make it look believable. It's hard, so we either wouldn't do it at all or do something else. But we never censored ourselves. I can remember. Or maybe there was self-censorship going on. Maybe we didn't come up with things that were sort of really out there. But we never said, oh, that's too much. No, we shouldn't do that. The amount of it, sometimes I got bored with it, frankly. I got bored with as a technical challenge, I got tired of it. The shootings, especially. I mean, you know, there's a device. There's this thing that looks like a lamp stand with another piece that goes over with a nozzle on the end and a tube, and you know, you go like that and it sprays blood on the wall. It's, you know, it's out of camera range, and or it's placed strategically so you shoot somebody in the head and the thing appears and it stains the wall behind them. Well, it got tiresome. And I don't think that we then went, oh, how can we be really outrageous and do some other kind of violence that isn't tiresome? We didn't really do that. We just sort of did less. Was boring, got boring.
And this was a show where, you know, regular characters would be killed off. Was that something that, was anyone not safe from being killed off?
No one was not safe, including Tony Soprano. He wasn't safe either. But in order for that to happen, I had to be in a certain frame of mind, which had to be that I don't care whether the show goes on or not. I don't care whether we do more of these or not. I had to get there in order for that to happen, because that would have been the end of the show.
How were the actors told that they were perhaps being killed off?
They were. I would invite them into my office, and I would tell them, I have good news and bad news. I know you've been concerned about your lawn. You're going to be able to spend some time with that. No, I didn't say that, but I would call them in and tell them what was going on and why, and it was very hard for them. The only reason I'm laughing, I'm not laughing at that situation. I'm just laughing at Tony Sirico. When in the first season, I don't know whether it was in the first or the second season, this character Mikey Palmisi, who was Junior's head guy, was killed. First season, I guess, yeah. And the actor Al Sapienza, he really didn't want to go. It's a big deal. It's steady work. You start to get renowned. People recognize you on the street. It's steady work. It's steady work. The actor's life is not easy. And Al really didn't want to go. And when I told him, he tried to convince me of all the ways that this scenarios that could be different for this character. Maybe this could happen, or that could happen, or maybe he this, or maybe he that, or maybe he comes back. And I would just say, no, Al, no. So it's not going to happen. And he was crushed by this news. So I guess it became known to the entire cast. So he shows up for the read-through the next day, and Tony Sirico, compassionate as he is, sees him and goes, that. It's like 4 people in 4th grade. And Al just looked so crazy. He just didn't even look back at him. He didn't think it was funny. It was just so strange. A couple of them really didn't want. He was one that didn't want to go, and there was another guy that didn't want to go.
Stop there to change the tape.